Thank you. Welcome back to Sun, Sand, and Sold. Joined by Jeff Bercow. Jeff, welcome to the show. Nice to have you, and thanks for taking the time with us. Jeff, wanted to start by just giving you the chance to introduce who you are and a little bit about your firm. And I think for our audience and those lay people, a little bit about what your firm specializes in, how you do what you do.
Sure. Thank you. I'm Jeff Bercow with the law firm of Bercow, Radell, Fernandez, Larkin, and Tapanes. We're located in Miami. We have 18 lawyers, and we specialize in land use, zoning, and environmental law. That's the only thing that we do. So we call ourselves a boutique law firm. We don't do any tax work, litigation, other than real estate-related litigation. Corporate work. We concentrate on zoning and land use. We work in all of the local governments in Miami-Dade County, including the county itself, the cities from Aventura and Miami Gardens in the north to Homestead and Florida City in the south and All Points West. We represent landowners, investors, developers who are seeking approvals from local governments. We do a little bit of work in Broward and Palm Beach counties as well, we specialize in our essentially in work for developers who are trying to create new product, create jobs, places for people to live, work, and play.
That's great. Thank you for that introduction. And I think I'm going to start by building off of what you said about local governments. I think it's a common misunderstanding in terms of how land use and zoning actually work. Who is responsible for what? And I think it'd be great just to educate our audience and those people who are not familiar with that. When you say land use and when you say zoning, who are we talking about in terms of the authorities, and how do they all essentially interplay with one another when it comes to development?
Sure. In Miami-Dade County, we have essentially two different forms of local government. We have the various cities, such as Miami, Miami Beach, Doral, Coral Gables, etc. And within those corporate boundaries, we obtain approvals from the city government itself. City Commission of Miami, City Commission of Miami Beach, Aventura, etc. There's also a large landmass within Miami-Dade County that is unincorporated, meaning that county government acts like the city. And county in those areas, the county is the zoning authority.
Is that where they put those community councils together?
Well, they are intermediary authorities for smaller zoning requests, and they can actually vote on appeals. On zonings and rezonings, but that's appealable to the county commission. So, to give you an example. The area where the Jockey Club, the Cricket Club, and Quayside are located happen to be in unincorporated Miami-Dade County.
I didn't know that. I thought they were in North Miami.
Me too, yeah.
No, that it's an enclave of Miami-Dade County. You've got North Miami to the north. You've got
Miami Shores,
Biscayne Park to the west. You got Miami Shores and the city of Miami to the south. So it's completely cut off from the rest of unincorporated Miami-Dade County, but the county is the local government and the zoning authority in that area.
It's like the Vatican in Rome, sitting on an island.
Yeah, well, exactly. So if you had a project in that area, you would go to the county to file an application, and if it's a rezoning, you're probably going to go to the community council first, and then after the community council, if there's an appeal, you go to the county commission. If there are any environmental issues, that's going to be reviewed by Miami-Dade County DERM, Division of Environmental Resources management. In some cases, you might, because it's on the water, you might need permits from the South Florida Water Management District or even the Army Corps of Engineers, especially if you had environmentally endangered resources within the area. But you don't in that particular area.
Don't you also have potentially the State Department of Environmental Regulation, DER?
The DEP.
It's DEP now. Potentially, but not in that area. I mean, if you were going further south to where the bay is basically undeveloped, the bayfront is undeveloped, or further west into the Everglades, then yes, Florida Department of Environmental Protection would be involved.
So you can have a lot of different regulatory authorities dealing with any kind of waterfront property, correct?
That is correct.
Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. Aventura used to be unincorporated Miami-Dade.
Correct.
What is it that has these unincorporated sections of the county remain unincorporated? Why have they not been annexed or absorbed by nearby towns and cities? That's probably a complicated question, but I'm just curious what the genesis of that is.
There are some areas that have been heavily fought over by neighboring municipalities. There are areas adjacent to Medley, Doral, Virginia Gardens that have been fought over for years. There have been political moratoria placed on annexations and incorporations to kind of stop all the battles. The moratoria have been lifted. The incorporations and the annexations have moved forward, but just not all of them. Not all of the areas have been annexed or incorporated.
Do you see more annexations going forward is it because of the tax benefit, like the city wanting to get those people in their tax base?
That's the principal reason why incorporations happen. And it's also one of the reasons why moratoria were put in place, because the county didn't want to lose the tax base. Mm-hmm. So when certain cities were incorporated, like Doral, there was an agreement put in place that required certain monies to flow back to the county. Oh. It's not my area of expertise, right, but I know enough about it to be dangerous.
When I first worked on Fisher Island some years ago, it had followed a series of events that I know a lot of the community there had tried to lobby for incorporation, because most of Fisher Island, except for a few parcels, sits in unincorporated Miami-Dade. Some sit in Miami Beach, but most sit in unincorporated Miami-Dade. And I remember I came in just after that, and it was quite the argument.
There's a small area at the southern end or the northern end of Fisher Island that is under Miami Beach jurisdiction, right, but the rest is unincorporated. Yep.
So let me ask you a question about development in the area, and I'll just call it from Brickell all the way up through Edgewater, and dealing with issues of high-rise development and the impact on the community, positive and negative. And what you see going forward into the future, because one of the things I have mentioned is that I don't know that we have the foresight and the long-range thinking that we should, as becoming a sophisticated and developing community where people from other communities like New York and Boston are moving down here, and people from South America, people from Europe. We're a relatively young city, and development really of the high-rise market didn't really start until the 80s. And here we are.
Really.
Yeah, and here
after the 2008 crash,
right,
or and actually 2005 is when it started.
And here we are, transportation is a mess, flooding is a mess, and affordable housing is a mess. How do you see this Live Local Act working, and how do you see development, responsible development? And I know you have a lot of clients in this area, but what's your vision of what's going to happen going forward, and how we don't price out people living where they work so that people aren't driving 45 miles from Homestead or Pembroke
right.
Pines to come to work?
Right. Well, that's a big consideration. What we're seeing right now is that you've got working families who cannot afford to live in Miami-Dade County in the style to which they would like to be accustomed. In other words, everybody wants the home with the picket fence, backyard, couple of dogs, couple of kids, etc. To get that kind of lifestyle today, you're basically going to have to buy somewhere in South Dade, Homestead, Florida City, selected areas out west. There's really not much product that is available. So we are seeing working families with kids leaving the county. It's documented and there's data to that effect. No one wants to see that happen. But that's something that happens around the country where you have tourist destinations. You see it in the Keys. People can't afford to who work in the Keys can't afford to.
No,
live
they live in
Keys.
Florida City and they drive down to Key Largo
Exactly.
and Isla Mirada.
You see it outside of Jackson Hole. You see it in a number of areas around the country. So the government has to take steps to make sure they don't lose their working families.
You know, they have that in Aspen where they have
Yes,
supplement to working people, and they have a workforce housing just to make sure people can work there.
So we have a problem in Miami-Dade County and Florida generally called the missing middle. So you've got the folks who live in affordable housing. They're basically living at the average median income of the county or lower, and the residential units that they live in are often financed or subsidized by government funding, whether it's state, federal, or combination of programs, loans, etc. You've got wealthy people who don't need any assistance for their living, and then you've got what's called the missing middle. The missing middle are the types of people who are your workers, your blue-collar workers and your government workers, your policemen, your firemen, teachers, nurses, etc. Folks who, can't afford to live in the fancy high-rises but don't need to be in affordable housing. That's what the state's Live Local Act is attempting to address. The state recognized that the local governments either weren't doing anything for the missing middle, for workforce housing, or they couldn't force developers to provide it. So
how does it work?
The state wanted to incentivize workforce housing to take care of those folks who are living anywhere from at the median income level to 140% of their, or 120% under state law, of the median income in their counties.
Is it in the county or the city that they're living in?
In the county.
Okay.
And it goes county by county. And for each local government, and even if you're in a city, you have to use the average median income, area median income for the county. The state says that if you are building a project in an industrial, commercial, or mixed-use zoning, and you are willing to provide at least 40% of your units at the workforce housing level, that's from 10,000 feet up. The technical language is 120% of area median income or below. Then you can build your project as of right at the highest height within the jurisdiction within 1 mile of the property, at the highest density in the jurisdiction, and at 150% of the floor area ratio within the jurisdiction. Otherwise, you have to follow the regulations, the underlying zoning regulations of the property, setbacks, parking, etc.
So let me ask you a question. So if it's 40% of the units, that doesn't mean 40% of the FAR, correct?
What does
Floor
FAR
area
mean?
ratio. It means they could be smaller units. It's just 40% of the units. And presumably they're going to
correct.
be the lower floors, not as good of views, but they're going to be in a great area.
Yes.
In an area where they could walk to work, they could take the
Correct.
bus to work, and they don't have to drive 40 miles. So
And there's also 2 other additional incentives. If you have at least 71 units, 71 workforce units in the project, those units at 120% area median income or below get a tax abatement of 75%. And if they provide units at 80% or below, it's taxes are completely abated.
is that for the unit owners when they buy, or is it for rental? Is this for rental or for
It's
ownership?
for rental projects.
Okay.
It's for rental
So
projects.
compare that, Jeff, in your perspective to more traditional opportunity zone development that obviously has tax incentive. I mean, do you feel like is the state, taking that and expanding on it and making it more, more digestible for developers given the incentives you're talking about, or is it comparable in a different way?
Well, they're real, when you say for traditional development, your average developer who's building a high rise on Brickell Avenue or not Morningside, what's the area?
Edgewater.
Edgewater. They're not getting any government funding. So they're getting all private funding, whether it's private equity, private loans, institutional loans, etc. The affordable lenders, the affordable products are getting a variety of subsidies, loans, and grants from institutions, from state and federal government. So this is a new funding source. It's not really funding, but they provide incentives, zoning, entitlement incentives in order to encourage these developers to provide more workforce housing units and to give them a tax.
And this is for that missing middle of people who
That is correct.
otherwise have to live 30, 40 miles away in southwest Dade County to drive to Mount Sinai Hospital to work as a nurse or
Correct.
to be a fireman, and lets them live local and be closer and have the amenities that are in these nice projects.
Correct. There's also one other program that Mayor Howard Weinberg started in Aventura, which he calls Hero Housing.
Oh, cool.
And in Aventura, and this has only been implemented in one project so far, but Aventura has its own police force. It also has its own teachers. It has its own schools. Aventura has invested in charter schools in the city, and they employ their own teachers. So they have worked out a deal with Related, along with Related's partner Isaac Toledano, to provide what they call hero housing in a new project called Icon Aventura to be built immediately west of Aventura City Hall. And there are a number of units, I think approximately 40 units, that they're putting aside for teachers and policemen of the city of Aventura.
Fantastic.
And they will be offered these units at half market price.
But that's the vision and the visionary, aspect that I think we're missing in general in South Florida. I know Mayor Levine Cava's working on affordable housing, but there's resistance to that. And over the last 30 years, there hasn't been that vision. How did Mayor Weinberg come up with this idea? Where did he get that from, if you know?
I have no idea. I think he just thought of it himself. I don't think anyone gave it to him. It's a great idea, and he's willing to implement it in other projects. We need to see at this point how many teachers, how many policemen take advantage of it, and whether it's really useful. But this is something that can be duplicated in other projects in Aventura. And obviously, it can be duplicated in other forms in other municipalities as well.
So, Jeff, let's juxtapose that against what we know is, an extraordinary amount of condominium development in places like Miami-Dade. And in our introduction to the show, we talked a little bit about the shadow market that has existed within condominiums of sort of an ad hoc, if you will, rental market, because people rent their condominiums, and that becomes a big piece of the rental economy in Miami-Dade.
Right.
How does this ultimately balance out? Because I think there's some people who look at programs like this say it's great at face value, but we also have to address the fact that, number one, as the median income in Miami-Dade and places like it rise with the influx of people working in finance, people working in technology that are paid significantly higher than the average blue-collar employee, does it still mean that some of these workforce housing units are still priced in a way that makes them challenging? And one of the things, and I'll add to that and say, one of the things we also know is, following the tragedy in Surfside, a lot of legislation was passed to help essentially safeguard condominiums into the future. Mm-hmm. And we know that's driven the maintenance expense for condominium owners up significantly, and that in turn has raised rents within condominiums up a lot. And there's been this a lot of upward force on the rental market that way. How does all this get kind of compensated against one another? And I think back to David's original question, how do you see this all unfolding over the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, what's your given how close you are to all this? How do you see this all ultimately coming together?
Well, I don't see the private sector's interest in Florida dying down. I think there's going to be more development. I believe it will be more smart development and more transit-oriented development, which brings me to the other topic that I think is important for the audience to understand, is the county's rapid transit zone. I think under the leadership and vision of Chairman Oliver Gilbert, a couple of years ago, the county commission expanded the rapid transit zone to include 6 or 7 rapid transit corridors in the county. You've got obviously the original Metro Rail alignment. You have Metro Mover. You have the busway. We also have the Northeast Corridor where Brightline currently runs, and it's probably going to become commuter rail as well. You've got the proposed phase 2 of Metro Rail, which was promised to the voters, to the African American community back in the 80s when Metro Rail was approved, but it was never built. And Chairman Gilbert represents that community, and he wants to see that happen.
That's so up towards Miami Gardens,
it's
correct?
Along 27th Avenue from current Metro Rail station on 27th Avenue all the way up to the county border. And there's a particular focus on commencing that area, commencing rapid transit on that area as well. We also have 836 and we have Kendall Drive. And what the county has adopted is a program that has a number of attributes to it. For one, they created a tax increment finance district within 1 mile of all of these corridors to capture the increased value of tax funding that will occur as a result of investment in rapid transit, and take that increment and use it as the local funding source for future rapid transit developments.
So if there's going to be a station in Aventura for Brightline,
Yeah.
there's going to be an area there where it's going to have a additional tax in order to help fund rapid transit?
If you take the entire corridor from downtown Miami up to Aventura and you draw a line 1 mile in either direction, all of those properties within that 2-mile area will have an increment, which is the additional taxes generated from the date that the increment started to today or each year, actually, that goes into this funding source.
When was that passed, if you remember?
Within the last couple of years.
Nice. Okay.
And at the same time, the county has implemented, well, those corridors are called the SMART Plan. And along the SMART Plan, the county has implemented rapid transit zoning so that within 1/4 mile of, and let's just start with the unincorporated areas that are not in cities. So within 1/4 mile of the rapid transit line, you're entitled to apply for zoning of up to 60 units to the acre at a height of about 8 stories. And within a 1/2 mile, the density is 36 units to the acre. Now, they've taken that concept and they said for those properties that are in cities, the cities have to meet certain minimum standards for their zoning codes. And the cities first objected. There was a bit of negotiation and there was a compromise between the cities and the county. And there are these minimum standards that are now in place. And now what we see in the city of Miami is there are a number of private properties that have been asked downtown to be put into the rapid transit zone. So the county has asserted jurisdiction over the private properties in the city of Miami and now have planning, building, and zoning jurisdiction over those properties.
So let me jump in on that because I think it was one of the questions that was in front of my mind, which is the relationship between the county and the cities and most specifically between Miami-Dade County and the city of Miami itself. How does that impact both the planning and go forward on this? Because I know that the city and the county don't always agree on everything.
Right. Well,
That's putting it
I
mildly.
can answer that question, but I wanted to just go back to why I raised the rapid
Please.
transit zone to answer your previous question, which is how are we going to deal with all of this additional development and all of, the future population that we see coming to Miami? I think everybody now agrees that we're not going to build more roads. We can't build roads to get our way out of it. The way out of it is rapid transit. And what the county has done and what Chairman Gilbert has said is we need to intensify development along the rapid transit lines. That is planning 101. You need to intensify development where you've made your investments in infrastructure. And in order to do that, we need to zone those areas to encourage increased development, whether it is homes, whether it's apartments, or offices, retail, mixed-use development, a combination of all of them.
So this is what you're calling the responsible development.
That is correct. And we need to encourage development along those areas. And that's going to be a fight in the cities because you've got a number of cities that are, small, quiet little suburbs, and they want to stay that way. Mm-hmm. And they will stay that way, except the areas along South Dixie Highway, for example, are going to change. And we need to do that because we are no longer a quiet little suburban Miami. We're a big international metropolis, and it's the city of the future.
Let me ask you a question. Do you see 20 years from now rapid transit not only 836, but up I-95 all the way to Palm Beach, as well as on the next to the turnpike going south?
Not at this point. I see it. I mean, it will be on a corridor parallel to 95. It's going to be along the old FEC tracks.
But you will see that in your mind.
Yes, absolutely.
And do you think you'll see it 836?
What we're going to see on 836 is, remember before I mentioned to you that there's a zoning corridor that extends within a half mile in either direction. The corridor along 836 extends a mile in either direction. And we are going to see increased and intensive development along that corridor. Yes, absolutely.
Jeff, I'd love to get back to my question on the city and county positions, and ultimately it's political, but less from the political lens, but from your perspective, how that ultimately gets mediated, because clearly, again, there's so much development in both these cities, and again, you've got some of the smaller ones that have the concerns that you just raised. You've got some of the bigger ones that I have to assume, when you just talked about what's going on in the city of Miami, where the county is claiming jurisdiction. I'm sure the city is not thrilled when that announcement is made.
The city has initiated litigation. They have commenced discussions as required under Florida law when one government sues another. But the city of Miami has been dragging its feet as of late. The whole issue was prompted by the county's attempt to initiate joint development of the transit-oriented development of the Vizcaya station along the Metro Rail. To go back in history just a bit, take a look at what's happened at the Douglas Metro Rail, Douglas Road Metro Rail station.
Yeah, crazy development, residential, 10, 20 stories.
Mixed use,
40, yeah. 40. We represented the developers of that project. That project is located in the city of Miami. That is city of Miami property. It's immediately adjacent to Coral Gables. But the county asserted rapid transit jurisdiction over that land 15, 20 years ago. And it was unchallenged. And we were able to increase the entitlements for the property by amending the county's comprehensive plan, and then everything that was built on that property was built as of right.
But it's a fantastic development.
It's fantastic, and that's what needs to be duplicated along every single rapid transit station in the county, such as Vizcaya Station. And the county initiated efforts to do that. They put out an RFP. They got some excellent responses from the development community. And the residential community went a little crazy and said, no way, no how, we won't have it. The commissioner for the district picked up the cudgel and started to initiate complaints with the city of with the county. It led to litigation, and there have been discussions. There have been the expected complaints about additional traffic. Yeah, we're going to have some additional traffic for a while until rapid transit catches up.
Let me ask you a question in that regard. Do you think that these zones next to the rapid transit is a way to diversify the economic areas? Like in Aventura, you have now high-rise office development and the like. At Daytran and down at Dadeland, you have that area of offices, and people from southeast Dade go. A lot of
multifamily too.
They go right there instead of coming downtown. It used to be you went downtown. Mm-hmm. You're seeing law firms, you're seeing accounting firms, you're seeing businesses diversify to different areas of the county. Do you think that will continue in order to help the county be able to absorb all these new residents and to take care of the residents that can't afford to live on Brickell or Edgewater or Miami Beach or Aventura?
I think that's a natural byproduct. It's going to be not only the to satisfy the needs of the residents, but I think local businesses don't always want to be in Center City, and they want to be in some of these, urban villages, if you want to call them that, these small town centers. And yeah, I think it's a natural outgrowth of our economy.
Well, I look at places like downtown Doral that
Doral's another
have seemingly
one.
sprung up overnight, and you look at it, and now there's real density, there's real development.
Yeah, people live there and they work there.
Right.
Live, work, and play. It's sort of the byproduct of the new development.
So now let me ask you a different type of question about gentrification. You see the downtown west of the arena area and how it's been built up with multifamily. And you see Wynwood and how that's been built up. Do you see significant encroachment into Overtown, and where do those people go if this area gets built up? Just like Little Haiti, same thing. Where do you see these people moving to? Do you see affordable housing staying there?
In many cases, what happens is they don't get forced out by the new development, but property values rise. And if they're living in a rental project, their project is going to be bought out, and then they will have to find a place to move. People who own, and it's not, in a lot of these neighborhoods, people are not living in homesteaded properties, but those who do, they can afford to stay as long as they want.
What do you do with the Section 8 housing that's in the midst of those areas? Do they get moved to other areas? Do they get incentivized to move the Section 8
question.
housing?
We are currently working with a developer who has responded to a county program called Rental Assistance Demonstration Projects. And these projects are intended to redevelop outmoded affordable housing that has gone beyond its useful life. And the way these programs typically work is that the responding developer must provide for housing for those residents who are on site. So that the replacement housing, the redevelopment housing, occurs in stages, and you relocate people out of one building when another building gets built, and so forth and so on, until they're all relocated on site.
So can they take a big site that has 2 stories and make it higher density and cut it in half, and then let the developer take the other half of the property and build something commercial there?
And that's what's happening. Yes.
Right.
I can't talk any more about it.
No, I understand, but it makes sense if you but if you have a development on 15 acres or 10 acres, and you can put the same number of units, and you have newer units, and you put them on 5 acres, you have 10
newer
acres to
units
develop.
with
more amenities and
more amenities with retail.
Right. Let me for the sake of for the time as we're coming to the end of our time with you, Jeff. Let me pivot a little bit and ask a couple of questions in a slightly different direction, especially given your firm's expertise. I think one of the questions that comes up a lot. I work with a lot of developers and field a lot of questions from people about infrastructure.
Is that why you wear black like Darth Vader?
Exactly. Yeah. Fundamental questions of infrastructure, the ability for new development to sort of exist within the framework of existing, base infrastructure, whether it's drainage, obviously traffic, and we've talked a little bit about that. From your perspective and some of the work that your firm does, when you look at Miami-Dade County, you look at obviously, space is starting to run tight. how does the balance of forward development also get looked at through the lens of infrastructure in terms of saying, how does our basic ability to live and work here also come into light when we see things like flooding, when we see things like, sort of core utility issues? What do you say to people who are asking those baseline questions?
Good, responsible developers are going to provide the infrastructure needed for their project on site. Good, responsible developers are not going to be building any homes or other structures that rely on septic tanks anymore. That's not happening. If the stormwater for your project has to be provided for on site, and you must assure that stormwater will not overflow into other adjacent properties.
Or the bay.
Yeah, well,
they have to go to the bay.
Especially the bay. But it's not only on site that we're concerned about. You want to make sure that your project doesn't have impacts off site. So if your project, for example, is going to generate a lot of traffic, and that's going to cause a problem at a nearby intersection, then you as the developer are responsible for improving that intersection, changing the signal timing, doing whatever needs to be done to make sure that the level of service is maintained.
Is that what they call impact fees?
Well, impact fees go towards those types of improvements. But in the larger projects, there are traffic reviews and reviews of water, sewer, stormwater development, stormwater management, etc., that sometimes will require additional off-site improvements over and above the payment of impact fees. So you may have to improve a road. You may have to provide a lift station for the area for sewer. You may have to provide other improvements.
Jeff, is this a back-end route? I mean, from a city perspective, is this a way to essentially bolster the existing infrastructure, maybe beyond just the need for development, but to say, listen, when city and county funds are limited, does development actually potentially help reinforce infrastructure in a way that's positive?
Well, yes, it does, but if there's no need, if the project doesn't generate the impact and the project isn't going to provide the additional contribution towards infrastructure unless they need it to get the votes.
Right. That makes sense. In sort of an expanded conversation, we've been talking a lot about Miami-Dade County. I noted a recent Daily Business Review article that was talking about a lot of land use attorneys starting to look outside of Miami-Dade County for sources of business, because Miami-Dade obviously has inherent limitations in terms of how much more and how much longer. It sounds like your firm is still very much focused on Miami-Dade County. Do you see any of that as a sign of sort of what people are seeing in 10 or 20 years as kind of the end of some of the versions of development as we know it here in Miami-Dade?
So our firm does some work outside of Miami-Dade County and outside of South Florida. We can do due diligence work anywhere in Florida, and we can probably do approvals work, and we have done approvals work elsewhere in Florida. We just need to make sure we associate with the right people. But I'm not worried about development stopping in Miami, and I'll tell you a parable or a story that occurred that I experienced probably 40 years ago when I attended a real estate conference in New York, and this was the early 80s. And speaker after speaker got to the podium and said, "Well, look, what we're talking about is for areas outside of New York." Manhattan is all developed and we're finished at this point. There's not going to be any more development in Manhattan. And look at what happened in Manhattan since the early 80s.
Right.
The land is, yes, the land is restricted here. It's restricted in Manhattan, but it's the imagination of developers is not restricted. And you can continually create new land by assembling and redeveloping and and inventing new products.
That's what they did in Edgewater. They had all those single-family homes there. One last question that I have for you is, do you see or envision Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County governments working together more in order to have a responsible development and quality of life for residents that may work in one county and live in another? Because a lot of people live in Broward and work in Palm Beach and vice versa. A lot of people live in Broward and work in Miami-Dade. A lot of people live in Miami-Dade and work in the Keys. Do you see these four counties really getting together and working more together?
I would certainly hope so. And a byproduct and advantage of doing so would mean that they would have increased force and representation and lobbying strength in Tallahassee and in Washington, D.C. when it comes for funding projects that are needed for our regional area.
Yeah, one of the things that I have seen is because of all the disagreement on where the next Metro Rail area is going, because of the disagreement about bringing Metro Rail or light rail to Miami Beach, which has been a 20 or 30-year fight, because of all this disagreement, we're missing out on all these federal funds for, rapid transit. And whether it's Dade working with Broward and Palm Beach, or whether it's the cities working within Miami-Dade County, without with the political infighting that goes on, the people keep losing. And, there's got to be more sophistication in government to realize that if you want those funds, you need to work together more.
Need to work together more, but we also need to have the zoning in place that encourages intensification along those areas, which creates ridership. If you don't have ridership, you're not going to get funding for rapid transit.
Great point.
Right.
Great point.
I do have one quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
I think one of the most important conversations that we had today was about the missing middle. I think that everyone can resonate with that.
Yeah.
Under your purview and your experience, if you were guiding our leaders here in Miami-Dade on maybe the first three things they can do, not just a Band-Aid on the situation, but things that are going to make a real impact, how would you advise them?
I think that, our governments, plural, need to stop trying to prohibit or limit the effects of the Live Local Act. We see a number of jurisdictions, Miami Beach, Doral, just to name a few, that immediately scurried to figure out how can we stop Live Local on or in our communities. Miami Beach, on the one hand, is crying for more workforce housing. You'll hear every city commissioner saying we need more workforce housing. How can we get workforce housing into this project?
And the businesses
But on the other hand, they're changing their regulations very, very quickly to limit potential Live Local Act developments in certain zoning districts.
Well, there's the foresight and the willingness to, part of leading in government is being willing to do things that may not get you reelected or that could cause opposition to your reelection, but that are important for the area you live in long term. And one of the things I keep saying is people keep living in the moment and they're not living with the long-term vision. And we need leaders that are willing to take on the long-term vision and the opposition to that vision.
I couldn't agree more. And we have some great county commissioners who can see that vision. Commissioner Eileen Higgins is terrific. Chairman Oliver Gilbert, terrific. They've got the vision. Commissioner Raquel Regalado has that vision, and they're willing to take positions and stick with them regardless of how popular or unpopular they are.
Yeah, and that's the hard part of being a politician, is having to get reelected and taking difficult positions that are important for the whole community to be healthy in the future.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Jeff Bercow, it's been great to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate your insight and look forward to speaking with you again.
Be happy to come back.
We're going to
Thank you.
take a
Thanks,
break.
Jeff.
We're going to take a break, hear from our sponsors, and close it out.